The GTA 5 Prologue is the event that sets off everything else, turning the game into the drama it is, all about Michael's family betrayals and so on. But just like in the video where I showed all the consequences of killing the tennis coach early in the game and how that would affect every event that follows. And trust me, if you haven't seen that one, it's worth checking out. What would happen if Brad actually survived the GTA 5 Prologue, and how could that even happen? In today's video, we're diving into the butterfly effect of this, drastically changing the game's events, and since I'm pretty sure you're gonna love this video, I'm already asking for that like and subscription. Also, if you want perks like early access to videos and exclusive channel emojis, consider becoming a member and join this awesome crew. With that said, let's get started. As we see in various dialogues throughout GTA 5's story, it becomes clear over the course of the game that Michael D's son is partnered with Dave Norton, a corrupt FIB agent, who orchestrated the whole Ludendorff heist in the prologue, so that during that heist Brad would be arrested and Trevor would be killed, even though the heist didn't go as Michael and Dave planned. What they called a clean job with no death, as Dave Norton himself describes in one of his lines.
Right. And what about Trevor?
What about it?
I need some resolution, Davey. You let him walk. You said you'd clean the whole thing up back in North Yankton.
And you told me it'd be a clean job, no casualties. There were more eyes on that town than there needed to be.
Even so, despite all the problems, Michael's final heist ended up being a success since he managed to ditch his old crew, seal the deal with Dave Norton, fake his own death, and escape to live with his family in Los Santos with millions of dollars he had already stacked. And from that point on, we already know everything that happens, but what if Michael hadn't betrayed his partners? What would the prologue look like? How would the game play out in 2013, 9 years after the North Yankton heist? Let's check that out here, and we'll start right now with the prologue. Here in the prologue, we're gonna start by looking at the possibilities of how this could have gone. And to me, the only way Brad wouldn't die in the prologue, even by accident, would be if Michael hadn't betrayed his crew before the heist. It's important to remember that by this point in the story, Dave Norton had already reached out to Michael somehow, so Michael had limited options on how to move forward during the time he was talking to Dave, since the effing B already knew Michael, and at this moment had his location, which put him in a really uncomfortable spot, maybe even with the effing B threatening his family or something like that. But Michael is cold and calculating, and we see that throughout the game, right? We also see that he can lie and betray people pretty easily, so here's how I imagine this would go down. Dave Norton would find Michael somehow and end up offering him a deal, just like in the original story. Seeing that he's been found and is backed into a corner, Michael would probably accept the deal, because if he refused at that moment, he could already be arrested by Dave Norton. Dave Norton might have gone there to talk to him with a bunch of agents waiting outside anyway. After accepting the deal, where he'd have to hand over Trevor and Brad too, he'd set everything up for the betrayal. But instead of setting it up to betray Trevor and Brad, he'd set it all up to betray Dave Norton. So after the meeting with Dave, he would tell his crew everything. He'd let them know he's in the grip of the FIB, explain the whole setup planned with Dave, the federal agents' positions, the location of the helicopter and all that. Then the ambush would happen just like we see in the game, and everything would be exactly the same up until after the train crash. Once the train hits and that part is over, that's when the game would start to change. Why? Because after the train crash, instead of walking into a certain death in the middle of nowhere, Trevor and Brad would probably grab weapons from the trunk of the car, which was prepped for a heavy shootout, and circle around the spot where the Federals are hiding to take them out. As soon as any of them had Dave Norton in their sights, the guy who knew all about the secret deal, a fatal shot would be fired at Dave Norton, kicking off an intense gunfight against all the local cops waiting there. A shootout that Michael's team, Trevor and Brad, would have a great chance of winning since they were prepared for the showdown, while the federal team was expecting to catch them off guard, so they'd be the ones surprised. After the fight, with some cops temporarily down, some dead and others wounded before more police reinforcements arrived, Michael, Trevor, and Brad would head to a nearby spot where a chopper was actually waiting for them. A helicopter that Dave Norton didn't know was really part of Michael's plan, and with that, Trevor, Brad, and Michael would escape Ludendorff, North Yankton, bringing the prologue to a close. After arriving in Los Santos, Michael would reunite with his family, who had already been secretly brought there, and buy a mansion in Rockford Hills. He would retire to reduce the risk to his family and take this opportunity to start fresh. Brad and Trevor probably wouldn't stay in Los Santos since Trevor isn't really into big cities. He makes that clear throughout the game, and Brad would most likely follow Trevor wherever he went. Trevor would very likely head to a rural area or a smaller town, maybe even Sandy Shores, to keep pulling heists with his partner or even dive into the drug trade, like we saw him do. The big difference here, regardless of Trevor's choice, is that in this scenario he wouldn't be broke, so he'd probably build a criminal empire fast, getting airstrips, planes, guns, vehicles and all that. But this time, besides the money, he'd have Brad as his right-hand man instead of Ron, who he meets later on. Michael's life would basically unfold the same way it does in the game. Inevitably, 9 years later in 2013, Michael would meet Franklin when Franklin tried to steal Jimmy's car. Michael would beat up Simeon, get cheated on by Amanda while he was her tennis coach, wreck Martin Madrazo's house, and then get threatened by Madrazo to fix it. But somewhere along the way, I think there would be a shift, and after that, things would change drastically. The first change we'd see during this time is that Michael would probably manage to get his boat back after it was stolen, because once it was taken, he could reach out to Trevor, who's involved in the drug and arms trade world, and most likely find the thieves and get the boat returned to Michael. But this wouldn't really affect the story of the game at all. The second thing that would happen differently, and this is where the game's scenario changes, is after Michael gets threatened by Martin Madrazo. When Michael is threatened by Martin Madrazo, he looks for Lester to plan the jewelry store heist and raise some cash. But now he won't need a new crew, as even Lester says the old guys were done for because his old team is still alive, like Brad and Trevor. So at this point in the game, the only new member we'd have for the heist is Franklin, who up to this moment in the game is still following his original story. Since this crew is mostly made up of professional thieves, they'd pull off the heist perfectly, maybe with Trevor even killing the guard outside the jewelry store, of course considering Trevor's aggressive nature. After the heist goes well, we wouldn't have Dave Norton showing up at Michael's house complaining like in the original, since Dave died in the prologue and few people would suspect Michael.
The whole job, everything about it, anyone who knows your file, what is wrong with you?
Davey! Long time no see.
And what about Trevor? If that fruitcake realizes, finds out you're alive, you are D-O-N-E fucked.
Don't worry about Trevor. Trevor's dead. It's gotta be. Besides, I didn't have nothing to do with it. Whatever the hell it is you're talking about.
No, really?
The criminals are believed to have escaped with millions of dollars worth of gems,
Oh.
precious stones, and engagement rings. Albert's story had a lucky escape when the thieves ran straight into it.
Yeah, I was just doing my job, and I say to this guy, hey, you gotta move these bikes.
I don't know anything about that.
Maybe some agents inside the FIB already had files on Michael by Toinette Abite, but none of them had enough evidence. With that, Michael would pay off Martin Madrazo and continue his retired life. Trevor and Brad would go back to their usual business, and Franklin would probably be added to Lester and Trevor's list for possible new heists as a driver, climbing up the crime ladder. However, in this case, without neglecting gang business so much, using the money he earned and the experience alongside more seasoned criminals to stay close to Lamar and probably grow their project, which was the Gangster Forums. Since Trevor would potentially have a bigger drug business thanks to starting out with money 9 years earlier, he probably would have landed a great deal with Wei Cheng in 2013, who approaches him for drug production and international delivery, ruling out Wei Cheng as a later antagonist. And because Michael wouldn't be in the hands of corrupt FIB agents like in the main story, none of the protagonists would ever meet Steve Haynes or Devin Weston. Also, of course, Michael would never meet Solomon Richards or get into the film industry. Brad would most likely remain Trevor's right-hand man until the end, until they fight over something and Trevor either kills him or just beats him up and leaves him in shock, kind of like what happens to Ron and Wade during the game. It's crazy to think how one choice can change the entire story that follows. To think that Michael might not have been a traitor from the start and still end up retired and successful makes you see GTA 5's story in a whole new way, imagining all the different possibilities of how it could have gone down. Of course, everything I've said here is just theory based on all my experience with GTA 5, having beaten it at least 30 times. But yeah, if you believe the story could have taken a different path, then of course it could have. If you want to know how GTA 5's story would have gone if Michael had successfully killed the tennis coach at the start of GTA 5, click right here next to the yellow arrow to check out that awesome video. And that's it guys, hope you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like and subscribe and we'll see you in the next video.